Hi, it's great to be here. It feels a little strange. We're not actually talking in person,
Right.
sitting in the same room, but I think it's probably indicative of the state of our industry right now. I think, certainly our hearts go out to all of those that have been affected by COVID-19. From an industry standpoint, certainly it's taken a toll. Certainly we see it in traffic levels. I know you and I were chatting recently, and just looking back at March 12th, we probably had one of our highest traffic days in recent time. We had over 50,000 flights that day, and we compare that with a month later in April 12th, we saw just over 10,000 flights in the system. So we could see just how drastically things have changed. And you take an airport like LaGuardia, just about a week and a half ago, we had a day where we had 30 flights at that airport compared to a typical traffic day, which would have been about 1,100 flights for that airport. So certainly, folks are dealing with a lot right now, and we're doing our best to ensure that we're there to support our customers while we take care of our own people at the same time.
Right. Yeah, those are interesting numbers. I've been looking at numbers from a lot of different perspectives, talking to some of the board members from the airlines, so they're telling me about the reductions in the flight. If you talk to A4A, they said at one point we're down to 15% of our normal traffic load in the system. When you mention places like LaGuardia that had a day that have only 30 operations, are you adjusting staffing at the facilities?
We
I know you're
are.
adjusting staffing for health reasons, as we heard from Paul Rinaldi last month, but are you also adjusting for a decrease in traffic, adjusting hours?
Yeah, well, one of the things with the decrease in traffic that it's allowed us to do is to spread out our folks. So one of the steps we took, several weeks ago was to really take a look at what was the minimum number of folks we needed on the shift to staff to traffic. And then we very simply just divided by the number of people we had to create multiple crews. This allowed us to spread folks out and put some distance between them and keep crews sterile and clean. We were not allowing folks to swap shifts. We wanted teams to stay together. It allows them to work a number of days and then take a number of days off, but people stay together. And I think I'm seeing it in our statistics as we look at the number of COVID incidents we're having across the system. So we are adjusting it, but that's to the extent that we're doing it. It's really about keeping our folks safe right now and not having more people in the facility than we absolutely need at any given time.
Right. So I know you need to focus your plans by facility. And this has never happened before. We've never seen anything like this before. We can look at past things that have happened, 9/11. We can look at, traffic from Chicago, when Chicago was shut down for a while and we had to close down sectors. Right. None of that's that applicable to this. The government shutdown really isn't applicable to this, but you have a specific strength in that you were the XCOM chair for CANSO. So you had the opportunity to develop personal relationships with the ANSPs all over the world.
Right.
Europe was well ahead of us as far as the spread of the COVID-19. So right. they were experiencing things before we did. Did your relationships help you with the planning that we did here based on other parts of the world, and how?
It did. Early on, before the wave started hitting here, I think we pretty much vacated, buildings by that third week of March towards the end. Some of our folks went a little bit earlier, but you're right, Pete. We could see over in Europe, it was hitting them harder sooner. I got on the phone almost immediately with, Rudy Keller from NAV Canada, Martin Rolfe from NATS, working with Simon Hockard, who now is the chair of CANSO. We had an XCOM meeting for Canzo probably about 3 weeks ago, and we're all comparing notes and what are the best practices, right, from cleaning, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, at some point in our discussion today, but what other practices are we doing? And I have to say, I think for the larger ANSPs who have more people, you've got the ability to sometimes to spread folks out. And I would say we're all pretty consistent right now in the things that we're doing. We're sharing lessons learned around cleaning strategies. How much is enough? What's the right material that you can use in a facility? You can clean equipment with one chemical that you wouldn't clean in other parts of the facility. You want something stronger. So all of those good practices. And then, sitting as the chair right now in Canzo of the Latin American Caribbean region,
Right.
Staying connected with, my counterparts down in that part of the world as well. And certainly the FAA, ATO, we've always shared pretty much everything we've got when it comes to helping other ANSPs, whether through hurricanes and now pandemics. So.
Right. Let's shift gears a little bit so this is the new norm. I mean, we're having a fireside chat and you're at your home and I'm in Tennessee. And we have people from all over the world right now that are on participating. So as we're starting to work like this from geographically dispersed locations, how are you handling cybersecurity? I would think that has newer challenges. And I know the ATO has a strong partnership with the technology office of the FAA. How are you developing AI, machine learning, things like that to incorporate cybersecurity into this new way of doing business?
Yeah, well, first I'd remind folks that for our critical NAS operations systems, we operate those on a separate, dedicated, isolated set of assets. So to the extent that people are working from home, it really doesn't have an impact on that. Going in weeks ahead of moving into a more robust teleworking framework for the agency, if you think back, the agency did this big telework exercise. We've done them before, but we did one a couple weeks before everybody vacated. ATO was working closely with AIT and the other corporate offices around IT, cyber, because we really wanted to ensure the robustness of the network, and we did. So we did many things to enhance the protocols around securely our folks that are working remotely accessing the networks. The Office of IT started monitoring much more closely the network around Office 365. They put in additional security protocols and also have been really vigilant about reminding folks about phishing scams, because a lot of bad actors out there know that people are working at home. And I think that the more used to we all get to doing this, we become much more attuned to those scams that are out there. And because the network security is something that we guard very much. But our cyber teams at the ATO level, at the corporate level, have really been working closely together to layer in protections so that we can protect our network and really enhance our ability to work remotely.
Right. Okay. So you and I discussed, obviously we talked before we had this fireside, we talked about some of the things we wanted to talk about. And I see some questions coming in that actually hit on some of the things that you and I discussed. So I'm going to go and discuss that a little bit. One of the questions we got from the participants is, as we ramp back up basically to a new operating normal, we're going to recover. How do you see the agency needing to adjust? And how are you preparing for this? Basically the new normal. Now, I know the new normal, we don't know what it's going to look like, and I'm not asking you to predict what it's going to look like, but what are some of the things you're doing to adjust the way the FAA does business and runs facilities?
Well, we don't know how long this is going to last, and we're certainly working. What we know is that what happens in Washington doesn't necessarily translate to our offices across the country. A lot will depend on following CDC guidelines, what's happening in individual states and communities with folks' ability to get back into their buildings, which I think really takes us all back to what we think of as normal. What we're already talking about is what are the opportunities for normal going forward. Again, we don't know how long this is going to last. And so we know that we need to be prepared for this working indefinitely. Individuals are dealing with different situations in their home life, their ability to even work outside of their home right now. So when it comes to increasing workforce flexibilities, this is what we're focused in on right now. And we'll probably see a gradual return of folks to what they consider their more normal workplace. But that's still yet to be determined, and that's going to take some time. So I think this working remotely, honestly, before 6-8 weeks ago, I think I participated in one Zoom meeting ever, and now it's a big part of my day. And I have to say, from a productivity standpoint, I haven't seen a degradation in productivity. A lot of people get tired of working through Zoom, but the alternative is to not see your coworkers, and I think it's been a very, very useful tool. When it comes to our facilities, when we started moving people out because we didn't want them to be as closely spaced to each other, we've got a lot of staff support in our operational facilities that are not in the buildings right now. Excuse me. We had those folks vacate probably 6 to 8 weeks ago as well. So we'll start to talk about what does that look like in our facilities, whether you work in tech ops, air traffic. Those folks will come back eventually, but we'll do it in a gradual fashion. Just to ensure that folks, we want to protect their health and their safety.
Okay. How are you made me think about a couple of things there. One of the things is, how are you addressing returning back to work? And then I want to ask you a question that everyone's asking.
Yeah. So, we have a large contractor workforce component to our FAA team. So there's multiple activities going on, certainly at the national level, at the state level. Within the FAA, we have a couple of different teams that are involved working on behalf of the administrator in alignment with DOT. And we're really looking at what does the gating criteria look like that it will take to get people back into our buildings, wherever those buildings might be. And I'll say we've still got some work to do on that. I think we're farther along than we were. But again, I would just say to people, it's going to take a bit of time. And I know people are anxious to get back to whatever their previous normal was. But again, I think we're being pretty productive in the way that we're working now. So we've got to focus on maintaining the health of our workforce right now. But there's several different work groups going on right now, and we'll have more to share. The administrator is anxious to kind of get a little bit more of our plans that look forward, but again, I think between Maryland and this part of the country, between Maryland, DC, and Virginia, we're still watching those statistics very closely on when it looks right to bring people back. But we will make the notifications. Our contractors that work in our federal facilities will understand when it's the right time for them to go back, just like our federal employees.
Right. We're getting a lot of questions about the Aviation Trust Fund and how you see this affecting that and what will be the consequences of that. If you want to just quickly speak about that. That's not really
Yeah,
your
you know,
operational.
I'll just touch on it a little bit. What I will say that, you know, our corporate finance office, Mark House, his team are very, very focused on all things trust fund right now. Certainly, you know, there's just so many things that have hit us in the past years, whether it was government shutdowns or furloughs. Now we have pandemics, and I think what gets frustrating to folks is when we lose the continuity of the progress that we've been making in so many key areas. So what I would tell folks when it comes to the trust fund, you know, we've got folks that are in our corporate finance team that are working closely with OMB, with the department, having conversations with folks on the Hill as well. And I know that in the end, we'll hopefully come up with some solutions that will ensure our financial viability for us to not miss a beat and keep doing things the way they need to be done.
Right. And I'm not putting words in your mouth, but there are very few options as the trust fund gets drawn down. Basically, you go to the general fund, but
Right.
you know, that's just my view of the world. You mentioned progress. So in my conversations with Paul Rinaldi a couple weeks ago, and by the way, Paul said nothing but great things about you, Steve, the FAA, and the collaboration that's gone on to get us through all of that. I've seen it myself on both sides, the collaboration between the FAA and the union. I think that's fantastic because that's what we read, right? That's what we need right now.
Right.
But when you talk about progress, is this an opportunity, because we discussed this a little, to get some of the modernization projects done while we're not so busy? I use the analogy of, you know, there's a meme you see on the internet that says, hey, while everybody's stuck at home, why don't you fix the roads?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Paul. First of all, I mean, the collaboration and partnership with Paul certainly has made all the difference to me in this position. The ability to work together and to really focus in on common interest and get work done. I think, you know, the work speaks for itself, and certainly we've had several years to get good at this. So, you know, it's a pleasure working with Paul and Trish and the entire NACA team. So there are some great opportunities. I agree with Paul. I know that from an airport standpoint, as an example, there are several airports out there that are looking at pulling back to the left their construction schedules for work on airports, runway construction. You know how invasive and disruptive that is to the operators in the system when they have to take runways, taxiways. Boston is moving their construction back. They're going to start in May. Newark is looking at pulling it back to start in the early summer. So I think from an infrastructure standpoint for those airports, I think we're going to see a lot more of that. When we look at the low demand in the system right now, I would say in my tenure as the COO, I've probably never seen a more pure operating framework. In other words, if there's any delays in the system now or any programs, they stand out. And in fact, I've had multiple conversations with our command center, and we're not putting any programs in by default anymore. So when they occur, they really stand out and people take notice. I think we can use this as an opportunity when we look at the work that we've got going on, especially through our next gen portfolio of projects. What could we accelerate? What do we have opportunities to do? I think it's a great opportunity for us to get in the ATO and push through some of our infrastructure projects that we've got out there. We're having conversations with OMB about that. But it's also a bit of a green field when we think about PBN work, procedures, trajectory-based operations, really getting in a pure system now, because the demand is lower, and really getting a much better feel sooner if something's working or not working. So really, I do think there's going to be a lot of opportunities.
So we're getting some questions from the audience, and it's something you and I discussed. As we get done with this and we do our after action reviews and reports and those types of things, one of the things that is going to become very clear is the resiliency of the system and the lessons learned from this. How does that process go? How do you learn lessons from this? How do you apply it to operations moving forward?
Right. Well, the one thing I'd say about my workforce is they're very resilient and very, very adaptable. So that from a contingency standpoint, we have contingency plans for every facility in the National Aerospace System. A lot of people have asked me, how have those contingency plans been working? I'd say probably almost, in the high 90 percentile. They're working very, very well. But nobody planned for a pandemic. And what I will say is those pandemics are now in our contingency plans. And the one thing that we learned, it was a bit successive. And, originally we were focused on the cleaning protocols. When we started experiencing COVID positives in our facility, we had to wrestle really quickly with, okay, we're following CDC guidelines, but, what about if, John was in one room and Sue was in the next room, and how many people really need to leave the facility? You and I talked some time ago, you were asking me about Vegas, why did everybody leave the tower? And I would back you up to Midway. Midway was the first facility where we experienced COVID positives and where we ran into challenges because what we saw was dealing with the health departments in these different states and communities was very, very different. There was no predictability. And Midway was the first one. And bottom line is we didn't get much support. We didn't get any from the local health folks. And we had to take everybody out for the 14-day quarantine in that Midway tower. We cleaned it top to bottom. In the early days, we had a different cleaning method. It was probably one of the few that we were using, and it took a little bit longer. It took them over 5 days to clean that facility. Through that 14-day period, aviation medicine in the FAA worked very closely with us, and we were able to get controllers and technicians back into the building prior to the full 14 days. About a week or so later, a couple weeks, came Las Vegas. Las Vegas was a facility where we had COVID positives, and we had presumed positives. Didn't get a lot of support from the local health folks there. It wasn't consistent. Aviation Medical stepped in, worked with us, and helped do contact tracing to really get an idea of, where was the individual in the building, who else did they talk to, were they close to. And for the tower itself, we wound up for an extended period of time closing the tower to our employees and working the approach control and then same thing with Midway, we reduced the rates. By the time we got to the next big one, which was Indianapolis, Indy Center, we've been gaining all of these lessons learned, and it was probably one of my worst nightmares at, an en route center, situated where it does in the country, and a large number of people. We had great support, by contrast, from the health departments there, and we got good support to do contact tracing, and in the en route operations, it was really two particular areas there on the floor that we were able to isolate that probably had exposure. But we took an ATC 0 on a midnight shift. By then we were aware and started using a new cleaning technique. We were using a fogging method. It's very quick. You can go in and cover a much greater area more quickly and get your folks back in there. And then we worked the traffic. We parsed it out to adjacent areas for the two areas that were down a little bit longer. We did need to take a little bit more ATC zeros, but by and large, what we've learned now coming out of the majority of the initial COVIDs is, get as many people out of the building as you can, staff to traffic, and then really rely on your contingency plans and for your resiliency. For some of our towers, we in multiple places worked with the carriers and used their ramp towers while they were cleaning our fed towers typically on overnight hours. If it was during the day, then they went in the day and we worked out of the ramp towers. So in one case, we worked out of a parking garage at the airport, and you do what you have to do. And we've just got a really resilient workforce that is all in and wants to get the job done.
Right, controllers, and Paul and I discussed that as well. Controllers are problem solvers. You put one up on a mountain or a hill with a radio, and they're perfectly happy, and they'll want to tell you all about it when they're done.
Exactly.
So what's going on? Let's shift gears again. What's going on with hiring and what's going on with training? Let's start at the academy, then to the facilities, and what do you see the long-term effects of that, and how will that affect your plan? All plans are out the window. Aviation forecasts, training, hiring, those are,
Well, budgets. The good news is, so we'll talk about, let's talk about the academy first. Unfortunately, we had to cancel our academy courses right now we're canceled through the end of May for people to go there in person. So that's for tech ops and for air traffic. What we did do is, there's been a few things that have progressed. We're still hiring right now in the FAA and in the ATO. All hiring is done virtually, working with HR. For the students we had to send home at the academy, we kind of worked our way. We tried to keep people there as long as we could safely, and then everybody evacuated. But we have switched to teaching initial basics for air traffic virtually, and we teach it now via Zoom and Blackboard. We started doing that. We've graduated 2 classes from that. We're looking at the numbers. The pass rates are consistent. And it looks to be, it's certainly of equal caliber to going and taking it in person. So that was really good news, and it's a big takeaway for us in terms of how we teach that class. So whenever we come back, we'll be looking closely at that, because we may have some opportunities to do more virtual training. For some of our initial qualification classes for tower, terminal, and en route, we're looking at a virtual component of that as well, so that we can keep training now while we're in this interim period. There's instructors involved. We're going to give students more time to work through the problems that they have, but we haven't stopped some of our training. It's pushed us to do things probably a little quicker than we thought we would. And I think we're seeing really good results from this. So we'll be data mining this to a great degree. From hiring,
maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a good
thing. It is. I mean, I think back to the team that you were on when it came to training.
Right. So do you think that's something that you'll continue forward doing distance learning? Because I see a cost savings there. You don't send people to the academy. You don't, housing, all those things that you have to do. Yeah. And, Blackboard, I just took an MIT certification class. It's good enough for MIT. I guess it's good enough for us.
Yeah, no, I think that we will. And will it be 100%? I don't know, but I think this is great. And I think that we can really do something with this. So I'm excited about that. From a hiring standpoint, our target for controllers in 20 was 910 controllers. We're more than 80% to the target already. So we had really made good progress. And I believe that we'll be able we'll make our target, I believe, this year. We did a general announcement in January. We got over 7,000 applications. And then we just in earlier March had done a previous experience bid, and we got really good results from that as well. So I'm sure we'll be able to pick up some previously qualified folks. On the tech ops side, our target this year for technicians was 522, and we are, I think the latest number I saw was 76% to the target. So I think we're on track there as well. And, we're going to push. I really want to make those numbers so that we can just continue the flow, because it takes years to get folks trained.
Right. That's interesting. What about in the facility itself?
Yeah.
Basically no training, right?
No, we stopped. With the exception in Alaskan Flight Service, it looks different in Alaska. The number of folks that are actually, we had several that were much farther along and trained. We work collaboratively with the union, and we're able to develop a process and structure so that we can minimize folks getting too close together and really practice social distancing. So that's a good thing. In the lower, for the rest of the country, no, we did stop OJT, but we are talking now about what will it take to start OJT up again, because we will get to a point here, hopefully in the not too distant future, where we can start to do that. We put, training targets in place for facilities. We really saw our CPC certification numbers climbing, working collaboratively with NACA and making really great results. So I think we're all anxious to get back to that.
Yeah.
But again, it's going to take a little bit of time, and we want to make sure we do it in a safe manner.
Okay. Let's switch gears again. What's going on with the NAC? We both sit on the NAC.
We do.
And the NAC has some priorities that I expect the next time we meet, which will probably be like this. We'll have some change in priorities.
Yeah.
I'll let you speak to that.
Well, so there's a lot going on at the NAC. At the executive chair level, certainly Chip Childs is the chair of the NAC from SkyWest, and Dan Elwell co-chairs that on behalf of the agency. Unfortunately, in April, there was just too many distractions with COVID. The decision was made, push the NAC. That's rescheduled right now for, I believe, July 30th. At the subcommittee level, I will tell you there is a lot of work going on. Certainly my folks are fully committed to the NGIP that we have, the work plan. I'm just heartened. The community, the industry has continued to meet in all of our subgroups. We're making good progress among all of those individual work teams. There's a couple areas that are going to probably take a little bit of pause till industry comes back to us, certainly at the chair level. One of those was Section 547 from REOF, which was the Enhanced Air Traffic Services. Basically, Chip had come back and said, let us digest based on all things COVID, and we'll come back to you. And we certainly understand that. And the other is the MCL. Industry is digesting all of that right now, but I expect at the July, if not sooner, probably at the July NAC, we'll get a little bit more insight from the chair on how he wants us to proceed. But we're making really, really good progress at the subcommittee level. We did get some interest on behalf of industry to perhaps sit down and have a conversation about, are we missing any opportunities with the decrease in demand? Are there some things that we perhaps want to focus on that we weren't? And certainly I supported that. I know we've got meetings that are in the works right now to sit down with a small group and start to really kick it around. And does it make sense to do some things that we're not? And are we focused on the right things if we're contemplating other opportunities? So we're staying very close to industry on this. And certainly I've told them, without their support, we want them fully engaged and on board. So we've got to work with them and hear them.
Right. Okay. Contract towers, different animal than your everyday facilities. And I know you have three major contractors with Midwest RVA and Serco. So how's the collaboration been with the contract towers, and what have you seen as challenges with that program that you haven't seen with traditional FAA facilities, with more efficient staffing, that type of thing?
Mhm. So the collaboration is strong. You know, our contract tower team has been very, very busy, and continues to keep the lines of communication open with all three of those companies. I've had contact over the last couple of weeks with some of the providers, senior leadership, just how goes it, you know. Really, they wanted to reach out to me to find out if I had any concerns, but the level of collaboration has been extraordinary. So I don't have any concerns on their part. I think that, you know, they're facing the same challenges that we are, and you know, basically you just gotta, you know, roll and you know, take care of your folks. And in the event that we do have to take any ATC zeros, we've had that with a few contract towers, then we provide services from an adjacent or an overarching facility. So we've all got to work together to get through it.
Okay. As we look forward, as we look at the programs that are already in place that have been successful, the ones that are ongoing, the ones that we're going to have to massage moving forward to ensure that we can continue modernization, progression, and all of that. Can you tell us about the changes that are coming for the next gen office?
Yeah.
Maybe touch on the Chief Technology Officer, the Office of Innovation.
Yeah. Well, I'll share what I can. And so, yeah, the administrator came on board. There had already been discussions about the stand-up of an innovation organization, and that is expected to progress forward, as well as in the last reauth called for an R&D organization and a CTO function reporting to the Chief Operating Officer. All of those things are underway and are expected to move forward. I can't give you an exact time frame. I'm excited about a Chief Technology Officer. That position, again, will report to me, and in many ways see it as a big complement in the ATO organization to kind of having all the pieces you need to be highly, highly successful. And, certainly Pam and I have talked about, we've got a small team that's been looking at her existing organization, and then how would that change as you staff up, a CTO function, an R&D organization, and to some extent an innovation organization as well. So all of those conversations are ongoing, and hopefully in the not too distant future here, I expect to see the bid out on the street for the CTO itself.
Okay. Can you speak a little bit to tech ops? Like, what do you see the role of tech ops in this virtual environment as we look to restore operations, and maybe speak to a little bit about the collaboration with the other unions like tech ops and the other ones that you're involved with, and the other stakeholders in the FAA?
Yeah. Well, before the mass exodus out of federal buildings in late March, one of the things that the administrator did, Steve Dixon, he pulled all of the heads of the unions in, and we had a sit-down meeting and really talked about what we knew at that time and what we were forecasting for the coming weeks. Certainly, I work very closely with Mike Perrone and the PASS team, but we have several other unions as well. The ones that couldn't be there in person zoomed in, and we did video, and then we've also done telecons. So Steve's done a couple of those meetings to stay connected to labor. And certainly I hear from my labor counterparts with things that have to do with the ATO on a regular basis as well. So I think, you know, I've got to say the level of collaboration through all of this has been really, really strong. And again, I think it's based on the relationships we had going into this, and then everybody teaming and just really just standing arm in arm to get through. From a tech ops standpoint, you know, we're moving to centralized maintenance and centralized staffing. We think this is going to be very, very efficient for the organization on how we deploy our greatest resource, which is our people,
Right.
and how we can maintain the more than 70,000 assets we have in the field when it comes to facilities, whether they're on airports and mountains, you know, you name it. So, you know, we do currently some level of remote maintenance and monitoring through our OCCs and our SOCs as well. We've got hundreds of thousands of lines that we monitor, and to some degree we can do some element of remote maintenance. We are focused though on a more robust remote monitoring and maintenance capability. We're actually we've got a pilot project we're doing up in Boston on ECOM, the en route comm that we've got, and really looking at building out our networks so that you know, when you can start doing more remote maintenance capabilities, it really can, especially in emergencies, save on travel and, you know, the number of folks that it takes to get out to remote locations. So this is a huge area of growth that I see for tech ops in the ATO now and into the coming years. And Jeff Planning is our VP of Tech Ops, is certainly a very, very strong supporter of this. So this is a big, big initiative for us.
We're hearing, one of the questions we have from the participants is we're hearing a lot about the contiguous United States. What about places like Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Caribbean, which you can speak to very well?
Yeah. Well, I'm, you know, happy to say all of our folks there are doing well. If we look at Puerto Rico, right now, Puerto Rico has mandated that all flights coming into the country land at San Juan International. And then the National Guard there is actually interviewing folks. And one of the first things you do if you go to Puerto Rico is quarantine for 14 days, similar to what we hear is happening even in Hawaii. So that's first off. And then they're also in Puerto Rico, there's no one is allowed on the streets at night. They've got bans on folks being out. It's not been a problem for our folks with their badge getting to and from work. Through all of that, happy to say that we don't have any COVID cases there, and our folks are healthy. So they're managing through it. They're resilient. When it comes to Guam, initially, probably about more than a month ago, we had 5 folks that were self-quarantining because they either had family members that had traveled to one of those countries or they had been near a suspected positive, but they've all come through it, happy to say, and they're doing great. Same thing with the Virgin Islands. So we're keeping our fingers crossed.
Okay, that's good. You know, you mentioned Zoom again when you were talking about the tech ops, and you mentioned Blackboard as two of the platforms you're using to communicate. Do you have a preferred platform that you're using? Because, you know, we've had a lot of security concerns with Zoom. You know, they're updating it almost every day. But there are things that the FAA discusses that are much more sensitive than what you and I are discussing here today that
That's
might not
right.
be appropriate for a platform like Zoom.
Yeah. So working with the IT office here in Washington, the agency mandated 2 weeks ago that for any Zoom meeting, you have to have a password. If there is a confidential discussion, those meetings are not taking place on Zoom.
Okay.
There's other methodologies we have to have those communications. But for the most part, you know, with the features that reside, I know there's multiple platforms. I've got colleagues that use other that I don't even know what they are. Zoom was a stretch for me when I started, but you can control who's in it. You can know better about how many people, you can kick people out if you want to do that. But I think more than that, for most of our conversations, they're not super sensitive, but if they
Right.
are, they won't happen on Zoom.
Okay. So we're getting close to our time out here. What's your top concern moving forward? And
Oh boy, you know, well, first it's just the health of our folks. You know, I have to say, even 3-4 weeks ago, every day, there were days we were having 3 or 4 facilities with people testing positive, presumed positive, and we're, knock on wood, I'm knocking, we're not seeing that right now.
Good.
It's really by exception. Teterboro has had several folks that tested positive, and we're working through that. But they're also in a part of the country where there's a lot of folks that are dealing with this COVID. You know what really concerns me right now is just, you know, I think we're doing exceptional when it comes to the work we're able to do remotely. I worry about hurricane season. It's on the door. You know, in a month, we're going to be right back in it, and our ability to remain resilient, whatever this COVID thing brings, we just, you know, it's not too long before we're right back in hurricane season again, which could be a challenge for some parts of the country.
what about the budget?
What about the budget?
So how do you see the budget affecting you moving forward, as far as planned programs,
Yeah.
staffing, hiring, those
Yes.
types of things? What do you think the effect is going to be?
Yeah, well, you know, it's tough when you watch the news and, you know, to not think about how is all of the billions going out going to affect other government agencies. You know, we've seen by example, more surplus in travel because we're not traveling. You know, we're seeing the effects of not doing some things on our budget, and we can do a lot of self-help. When it comes to our programs right now, you know, we're not in facilities if we have implementation projects like a Datacom, a TFDM. And before we can get back in those facilities, we need to be at the tech center and testing that software. So I think you may see some of our schedules pushed to the right. You know, but between OMB and the Hill, they've been very, very supportive of our programs and really our budget overall. If you look at our marks for ops and F&E, they have been very, very supportive, and we'll continue to work with them. And, you know, we know there could be some pain out there at some point, but we're so close on so many key programs that we just want to stay the course. And you know, our workforce, whether they're feds or contractors, have really been working hard behind the scenes, software code. I mean, there's multiple examples of programs that are still ongoing. And again, I would thank our industry partners for that. So we may see some impacts, but I think it's too soon to tell right now, Pete.
I think so too. But when you speak of impacts, like, you know, what I think of as I talk to the industry is the smaller contractors that are, you know, they're struggling right now. And when we start things back up, you're going to have to ramp some of these programs up that actually have been shut down for the time being.
Yeah.
Are you concerned that you're not going to be able to find the support through some of those smaller contractors moving forward? And do you have any, you know, you can't make predictions, but do you have any time frame to maybe when you'll be ramping that kind of thing back up?
Well, actually, our folks have been, we've already been having meetings and discussions about which programs can hit the ground running when the doors are open, if you will. a program like VORMON, you know,
Right.
which was a lot of upfront work, but we really had hit a stride. That's a program where we'll probably continue to make inroads and maybe even accelerate, because down the road we can save so much more if we do more upfront, where
Right.
some of our other programs may not be in a position to hit the ground running as quickly.
Okay. Well, we are just about out of time here. So I want to say thank you so much, Teri, for
Oh,
giving us your
thanks.
time. It's always great to talk to you. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thanks. And I'll look forward to doing it in person one of these days.
Me too. Yeah, I look forward to seeing you in person again.
Yeah.
Although we seem to see each other more away from home than we do at home.
Yeah, we do. And we'll look forward to when all of our previous activities start to get underway as well.
Yeah.
So Pete, thank you. And Abigail, thank you too. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Abigail, great job. Thank you so much for setting this up. Participants, thank you for joining us today. Wish I could see you all and talk to you all, but maybe at a later date. Thank you.